Hi, I just want to record here a brief overview of my experience of the game Battlelines Streets of Stalingrad. I feel kind of, not quite duty bound, but that kind of thing to do it because, but at the same time I've sort of held off a few days doing it for a couple of reasons. The thing is that I like this game a lot, but I am quite disappointed with it, and it's that kind of ambivalence that has made it made me feel that I should report it because I started my videos on this very enthusiastic about it, and B, it makes it difficult to speak about it because I want to document that disappointment and explain why, but at the same time I don't want to damn the game with it because I do think there is a really good game here. So it's a bit difficult sort of video for me to do, but it kind of needs to be done as an honest appraisal of my experience with the game. Now, I think the best way I can tackle it is to say that when I started, when I first started with the game, I just had one set, and I would play an operation in the set, which is 2 or 3 missions generally, and I would enjoy it because the game provides so much immersion in what it gives, even though it is a card game. You have locations, and you have this you have a big abstraction of movement, but you do have lines of advance and calling in reserves and bringing down bombardments and things like that. So you have like tangible objectives and directions to go in the space of sort of 2 or 3 lines. So you get a good flavour of performing an operation. You're bringing in your military units, you're assigning assets to them, you're determining a plan. Do I want to go this way or that way? Am I going to try and infiltrate with these guys? So shall I bring up that unit, or shall I hold that unit back to later and start with these units? So you have all this planning and then implementing of your military operation, and it's very thematic in that sense, especially because each deck is built around a particular unit. So it's slightly one thing about the game is it's slightly odd, and you have to get used to the terminology in it. And so, for example, a unit in normal cardboard war games, we're used to a unit being a single cannoned shit, and that might represent, say, the 9th Panzer Division or like the 105th Company of such and such. In this game, a unit is a whole deck. So in this game, this actually is the 9th Panzer Division unit, and then within that you get different formations. So and the formations are what we would normally think of as a unit. So whereas what they call a unit, we might normally think as the whole formation. So you've got a flak battalion here, that's a formation. Replacement battalion, that's a formation. A motorcycle battalion, that's another formation, all within the unit of the whole deck. And then again, an operation is a specific term used for a number of missions. And so it's a bit difficult talking about this because I might use the words operation missions in the usual sort of colloquial sense, but also at the same time in other instances use it in the specific sense the game provides. But nevertheless, that is it's one of the things which really gives a flavour for it, because it is very everything's sort of orientated towards these military terms and in a very careful fashion, relating it to actual units and then actual formations in a unit and things like that. So I think that's the first thing I want to say about it, why I think it is such a good game, is that although it's not, you don't have a map, so you're not moving things on a map, which we normally interpret as a war game being, because we're used to, we're taking the role of a higher, either it's a tactical battle, and so we want to actually see what's involved and see them clashing, toe to toe, or we're stepping back and then we're sort of taking the role of a general, looking at his map of operations, saying, okay, I'm going to move that one there and that one there. So although it doesn't have that, it's very abstracted, it just has locations. You do get that feeling of being, the general in charge of this unit, the 9th Panzer Division or the 18th Tank Corps, and performing your operation. I lost my thread, but yeah, so even though it's a card game, unlike many other card games based on war, the abstractions are not such that it takes you very far away into being just a sort of thematic card game. The abstractions are full of enough historical detail and what's the word? Sort of veracity to historical truth, that despite the abstraction, you're brought back down into the kind of boots and saddles level of dealing with different formations and so forth. So it retains a lot of verisimilitude, was the word I was looking for, to at least my imagination of warfare at this scale. And so in that respect, I liken this game to Up Front, in that Up Front also is a very evocative game of warfare, in purely played with cards, such as this one is. Okay, you have a few chits in both of them just to mark certain things, but they're just markers that supplement the basic card play for memory aids and so forth. But the cards are the thing. But then, and this is the key, I mean, this is the killer or the clinker of why this game, although on many levels, in many ways it's very good, it kind of can fall down. And that is, and the way it differs from Up Front. Now, in Up Front, at the beginning of every game of Up Front, you lay down your forces. So you already have determined the forces you have available. And then the cards just determine what happens to and with those forces. So the cards will determine, can you fire at that actual moment? Can you obtain a terrain now? Can you move with all your units or just some or none at this moment? But you've already determined the forces you have. And so the card, you know what you're going in with, and the card play just kind of enables you to perform what you want to perform. This game, on the other hand, you do not determine all your forces to start with. Now, I have to clarify that, because if you've watched some of the playthrough videos, you will know that at the start of every mission, each side chooses their starting forces, maybe 5, and then there's always at least one, that maybe 2, that gets discarded. So you're never exactly sure that you have exactly what you chose. You will not have exactly what you chose to start with, but you do have starting forces determined. You take them out of your deck, you look through your deck, take them out and put them down. Now the big difference from Up Front is that during the game, or I should say the mission in terms of this game, during the mission you will be drawing cards from the deck, and you can draw more forces from the deck to add to the table. So, and you are really not obliged to do that, but you are depending on that some of the forces that you're going to be using to perform your mission will come on a random draw from the deck. So what you start with is only your base. You're not going to rely completely upon that. Unlike an Up Front, what you start with is all the forces that you can rely on. If they diminish, that's it, your forces have diminished. Barring, special scenario rules where there's some reinforcements coming. But in Up Front, you never draw forces out of the deck and deploy them and go forward with them. In this game you do, and that is the big difference and the sort of the kicker for me, because what it means then is that one side might be fortunately drawing all the forces they need and they get a big force, and the other side unfortunately is not drawing those cards. They cannot get a big force, and so you get that random card play thing whereby this guy's just going to win because he's got the enough mass of force, no matter like the other card plays, the finesse of his plan, the careful preparation of the defender, and so forth. And so what I think that means is that up front does not dissatisfy in the way a card game can dissatisfy, whereby at the end of it you go, oh well, I played the best I could, but I just didn't get the cards that I needed. You were getting all the cards that were great, and so I didn't have a chance against you. Up front, that doesn't happen. You can say that, can say, oh, I never drew the fire card that I need, but the forces you have at the start are already determined. What you actually do with them is determined by I say determined. The deck doesn't determine it, but your moment to moment abilities determined by the deck, and then how you deal with your hand. Whereas within this, that the deck is able to determine a lot more because it's also determining your forces that are available, and so ultimately that is it with this game. I'm going to be drawn to it again. I'm kind of stiffed on it now because I was kind of it came to I played through this whole campaign and it ended in a bit of an anticlimax for me. But I know I will come back to it again and still be tinkering with it again and wondering if there's and looking for further experience with it, because it is such a thematic and evocative game, and it gives me a real sense of planning an operation and performing a mission in a more user friendly and a lot quicker a fashion than many board games do. So in the sense of upfront, it's similar to that. It gives the same kind of crunchy feel of a full-on board game simulation, but without a lot of the overhead. However, this falls down in respect to upfront in that increased randomness factor that this has. And that's what has ultimately disappointed me in the campaign, because when I started one deck and I would play the mission, I think, oh well, that mission ended quickly, or that, this we looked like it didn't go the way I thought, and so I might play another mission quickly again because I think, oh well, we were just unlucky on the cards. I'd like to have another try, and then I might be unlucky on the cards again, and then I think, oh no, this, and I'd have enough of the game because it seemed the randomness factor seemed to sort of be too much, and then I realised that you can play it multiplayer, and that is going to mitigate some of the randomness factor, because if you might have 2 or 3 missions running concurrently, and if one mission is unfortunate, your other mission might be fortunate, and or if one mission is looking unfortunate, one of the other players can assist, and so there will be a balancing factor in that. And then the other thing, I thought this is also really designed as a campaign for which you need all the sets and the upper echelon deck. So you can bring in extra assets in between. Well, no, in a whole operation, a number of missions, you do not adjust your deck. You would add in the assets before it, so you have to perform the whole operation according to how you built your deck. But then in the campaign you have a number of operations, so you can adjust the decks in between the operations. So I thought the campaign would again mitigate that luck factor in that you're playing such a number of operations and even more missions within them that you won't be able to say, oh, I was just unlucky in losing the campaign because of 1 or 2 bad card draws. But what I then found in playing the whole campaign was that there were some very powerful cards in it. And I alluded to this, I spoke about it in previous video, the last video that I just recorded of play, and that is that yes, there are some ultra powerful cards. I say ultra powerful, I should just say very powerful, because they can enable anyone in a turn to have such a number of operations that you can perform a lot of functions before your opponent has any chance to reply, and in that you might win the mission in one turn, because you're lucky in getting that card out of your deck quickly or not. Now, so I was a bit dissatisfied in that, because it started to look like, the side who gets out their high power card first is going to be the one that wins the mission, and it was feeling really dissatisfactory in that. But then at the end I reflected, yes, but maybe because if you're playing a campaign, you bring your high power card out. If I had played things differently, I could have used an airstrike and destroyed that card, and that's it. It's eliminated from the whole campaign, never to come back again. And I hadn't been using my airstrikes strategically. I'd been using my airstrikes more tactically, in taking out formations that were directly threatening an objective, for example, or about to attack key friendly formations. Instead of thinking further term, strategically say, okay, I think I'm going to lose this mission, but I'm going to use my airstrikes to take out his higher headquarters, and that means he won't have it for the whole rest of the campaign. So that's the kind of thing which makes me know I will come back to this to try a different strategy. And I think that's where this game really shines, is that it keeps bringing me back to it, because I feel there's more in it that I haven't quite got. I don't play it and say, okay, I can see what it's about. It's that simple and unsubtle that it just comes down to this, and so I can take it or leave it as like a nice beer and pretzels game. This is not a beer and pretzels card game. You can play it as that, just as a fun, okay, let's just bung this deck together and that deck together, and we'll play a few missions, complete an operation, and have an interesting story being told and some fun along the way. But to really get to where this game shines, the sense I get, and I'm convinced of this, is that it's very carefully tailored and doctored, that there's a lot of subtleties in it that you need to play with, and you need to think carefully about what your strategies and your tactics are. And so I think I'm quite satisfied now in the overview that I've given of my experience with this. So don't take this as a if you want a bit more of a review of the game, what the game's about, look at the early videos where I show what's in the decks and so forth, and how you set up, and even some of the playthroughs if you want. But I just want to give this overview to show the pros and cons for me of the game. And just to wrap up with that is to just speak about, because I hadn't addressed it before, the rule books. Now, when I first got the game, I got the first edition, which you have this rule book. It's quite small print and a small rule book, and it was fine for me. I read through it, I understood it, and I played it. There were one or two questions that I had, and sort of things that decisions I had to make on the fly, but ultimately everything was answered to my satisfaction, just taking the rules as written. It does actually include at the end some rules clarifications in like a question and answer fashion, and that's very good, because it also highlights for you to take the rules as they're written. For example, you have units stacked, and when you attack a stack of units, now when I play it, I don't physically stack them, I put them side to side, and I count the rightmost formation card as the top of the stack going down. Now the thing is if you are attacking a stack, the attacking always hits the top card, and they state that in the rules. And then in the questions and answers at the back, so the question is put, okay, so do I always have to use the top card from my attacker? And they say no, that doesn't say in the rules the top card has to be the from the attacking side has to be the attacker. So any card in a stack can attack, but it's always the top one of the opponent that is attacked. So they clarified that out, and that kind of gives you the hint that to read the rules as they are. Don't read it into them more or less than they actually say. And if you do that, I think the rules are very good. Now, one thing that I think which probably trips people up with the rules, and the second edition rules are much better. You can see it's already bigger, so the print's easier, and then they also use the chapter and verse method of case numbering. So you've got chapter 1 verse 30, whereas in this one they don't do it. It's just paragraphs without the chapter and verse numbers and bullet points. So that's helpful, and also obviously helpful because it's referencing different parts of the rulebook. So the second edition, if you can get one, that rulebook is much improved. It's also got colour in it. Essentially, what it says is exactly the same, except they've just changed one thing about stacking, which is very important. It's an important difference, because in the first edition you could unstack an unlimited number of diamond symbol cards with other symbols. They're essentially the higher assets, like the assets of the division or the upper echelon. In the second edition it clarifies how that works, and that you can only have one more diamond symbol than another symbol in a stack, and diamond symbols cannot stack alone unless one of them at least is stacked with another symbol. So that I think rule addition was necessary, in that otherwise you might often only play with your upper assets, because they're often some of the most powerful formations. And obviously in reality a unit wouldn't do that. You would send in your regular regiments or divisions, and then use your reserves as assets to reinforce them and bolster them, but not to rely on your reserves and hold back your sort of what would be your front line units. So again, that brings out the theme. Thematically it makes a lot of sense, and for the in game terms it makes a lot of sense. So that change was made, and one or two others, and they're mentioned in the rules. So there was improvement a lot of improvement in the rules in the second edition, not in the changing the rules themselves, but just in the layout, and a couple of rules improvements. But in both editions, something which I think trips some people up is that the rulebook starts by defining its terms. So you get the table of contents, and in both of them, and then you come straight, so table of contents, then you come straight to the introduction, common game terms and definitions. Then we start with adjacent. What does that mean? Advance. What does that mean? Assemble. What does that mean? Contact. What does that mean? Attacker. What does that mean? Etc. And in fact, now I'm looking, they've got a lot more defined here up front in the second edition book, which is great as well. And I think that tripped a lot of people up when they first came to the game, because often when you're reading a set of rules, you want to get to, okay, now how can I do what I need to do? You're kind of trying to imagine the game space. You're thinking, okay, introduce me to the game board, the units, and then what's the sequence of play? So, what happens within a turn? How do I play the game? And then more specifically, how do we move? And then more specifically, how do we fight? This doesn't do that. It starts with all these game terms, and you really need to read them before you. And there's 10 pages of that until you get to 11, the game components. And then again, the game components is describing the cards and what the bits of the cards mean. So there's 3 or 4 pages of that, and then you get to game setup, where then you actually will start to get a picture of what the game's about. Before that, it's all this definition of terms, and for some that might be difficult to stomach all that with no context to put it in. no worry. What I would advise is that you quickly skim through the game terms, get to the game setup, and then you will need to keep going back to reference game terms. But I found it very useful to come to the game terms first, because just you're reading adjacent. Okay, so locations adjacent, then advance. Advance is different from movement. Okay, so we have a difference between movement and advance. Now we have assemble. That's how cards get brought in from your hand. But not only, there's another thing, which is commit. Okay, there's two different things. Okay, so for me it was quite interesting to sort of have some of the game pieced together, a bit like in a jigsaw fashion. What is this bit? Where does it fit? But for others, I can understand that was a real frustration, and maybe it made the rule book hard for them to parse and understand as a whole, which might have put them off the game. So my advice to you is to bear with it. If you don't like that style, bear with it. Go to the setup and keep going back to reference the game terms. The game really deserves it. And I think I'll end on that, in that I think this game really deserves attention and play. Although I kind of know it never will get it, and that's partly because it's a dead game. They had planned, they had in the wings another, the Curse campaign, so it would have been under the Battlelines banner, exactly the same rules. Like there might be one or two finesses or slight differences for the Curse campaign, but it would have been exactly the same system, because there's also mentioned in the upper echelon campaign deck that if you win the whole campaign, then you get the chance to choose an extra deck to take into the next campaign. So the idea was that if you could play Battlelines and then you could play the Curse campaign as a series, and then obviously ultimately the other campaigns would have been offered. So it's not a collectible card game, but it's kind of like a buildable card game in that sense. You're not collecting units to try and sort of maximize a deck, but you collect sets to give you more units to work with, and a greater game, a bigger game to build up, to play with. So in that respect, it showed a lot of promise, and I think the game itself replies to that promise positively. It delivers on the promise in terms of the gameplay and the historical. I can't say simulation value, because it being a card game and different from up front in the terms I mentioned, it that random factor does bring in some kind of cognitive dissonance in that kind of disrupts the simulation value. But there's so much evocativeness is in it, in terms of kind of simulating this is the 84th Tank Brigade, that's its capabilities, that is the kind of firepower it can bring, this is the kind of ability it has to flank and so forth and move. That's all in there. So it answers, the game delivers on its promise in that terms, but it has to be taken as not an upfront card game. It's a step down from upfront in terms of card game simulation kind of crossover. So upfront's right up there in that it is a card game, but I think it's a very good simulation of war. It's just simulating war in a different fashion than Maps and Counters does. This is almost there with upfront, but because of the randomness of force draws due to the deck pull, it doesn't quite meet it, and so you end up with that modicum of cognitive dissonance required in your gameplay of it. And I think that is perhaps ultimately where it maybe fell down, is that the disjunct between the historicity embedded in it and the subtlety and careful finesse in developing all the interactions between the units and in fact the decks themselves, then hits this kind of, I drew my headquarters before you drew yours, and I get this big advantage on you, and it was lucky. And you can get that on board games. Your opponent rolls low, you roll high on a key battle, and that's it. The game's over. I don't know, and I wonder if that's why it didn't take off. I don't know why. Maybe just because it was a bit too different. So, with that all said, if you come across this, or if you have this and haven't looked at it, give the game a go. I think it definitely deserves it. And throw out your comments on one of the forums somewhere. It'd be really nice to get a bit of post hoc discussion on this game. I don't think it would ever be resurrected unless somebody took it on board and made their own version of it using the same mechanics. I think it would deserve it, and I'm sorry that it isn't. So it is out there, it can be got, and often in the whole campaign in one go. People tend to be selling it as that. So if any of this has piqued your interest and you're willing to give it a go, do so, and give your feedback and say, and let's talk about our experiences with different decks and different strategies, because my playstyle was a certain way. Next time I play it, I'm going to adjust that playstyle so that I will be approaching problems and challenges that this game presents in a different way. And that, I think, is the test of a good game. I want to come back to it despite its flaws.